Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of Inside the GM Studio, a podcast all about the tabletop RPG hobby. I'm your host, Matt.
And I'm David.
And this week I got to thinking about how much I love my little dog. She's the greatest thing in the world. I love her. She goes with me wherever I go, except into my tabletop role-playing games. But we can change that.
I thought you were going to say except on an adventure.
Oh, that would have been better. But we'll go with what I said, because no matter what I say, it's always better than what David has to say.
Oh,
so this week I wanted to talk about those familiars, pets, and companions that we get to interact with in our games. I've got quite a bit of notes here, as I am a big fan of especially familiars, because I play a lot of spellcasters in games. Familiars are kind of like my jam. I love having a little buddy so that if I want to go rogue and just go off by myself, I have some backup with me. Mm-hmm. I've never really played anything with like a beast companion, or even had, like when we played like AD&D in 2nd edition and whatnot, where if you were a fighter, you could end up with, they weren't henchmen. What were they called?
Hirelings?
Hirelings, that's it.
No, you could get henchmen. Henchmen follow you willingly. Hirelings you pay.
Right. So yeah, was it the fighter that got the henchmen?
Yeah, fighters. I think maybe even a couple of other of the warrior classes, but it was predominantly the fighter. Or if you're portmanteauing it, you just say henchlings, right? Like it just kind of covers both.
But I've never asked David this, because every time that I've played in a game with him and I wanted a familiar, I just said, fuck you, I'm going to have a familiar. I always wondered, because I've in the games before, you've been very kind about giving us, all of them really, like familiars, you make sure that we have the spell or something that's associated with that gives us a familiar. Beast companions, I've seen you just kind of naturally introduce into the party, usually for the ranger or the druid. Companions, you've done multiple times. Hell, they're usually an NPC that you get, or there's somebody that shows up multiple times. But I always wanted to ask you, what are your actual feelings on familiars, beast companions, any companions really, or pets?
Yeah, to me, I like hirelings and henchmen. I kind of count as like NPCs. You know, they have some sort of, even though they might be an underling or whatever, they still have some personality and autonomy of their own. They're not trained or bound to you in any way. So I kind of put them in a separate category. But yeah, I would say definitely familiars, beast companions, pets, and mounts too. To a lesser degree.
That's a good one. Yeah, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, and so the primary difference, at least in my estimation, is that there is some in-world explanation for why this typically animal or beast or whatever is bound to your character, right? And so they kind of there's some baked-in mechanisms. So like for a spellcaster, either the Find Familiar spell is on your list, or it's not. And if it is, then you're just kind of entitled to that as part of the mechanics of the game. In other words, you're entitled to an option that you may or may not avail yourself to, but most people that have the Find Familiar spell probably do at some point. And so that's kind of similar to the Summon Steed or War Horse that the Paladin gets. It's a similar thing. And so I kind of lump them into the same category. They're things that are options to you that you're entitled to by right of the game. As for a beast companion is something that is, again, there's an in-world explanation for your character build So you're really not even you're opting into it like as a particular option and a particular path for your character. So it's not unlike the fine steed or the fine familiar. They're not things that you could avail yourself to. They're things that you're actively going, okay, I'm choosing this path where I get a beast companion and it goes that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, a mount that's not the fine steed or whatever is likely something you purchase, or it's possibly something that you encounter. So it's either a transactional mechanic, a role playing mechanic, that presumably the DM wouldn't like. Obviously, there has to be mounts available in whatever civilized area you go to, or you have to find one in the wilderness that the DM says, yes, this is a thing that is now your mount. Maybe it's a Pegasus, maybe it's a Griffin, maybe it's a whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, the DM's not going to be too stingy about saying you're in a town, you can buy a horse if you want to buy a horse, or a mule, or a, you know, whatever. I don't know what other mounts people typically. It's usually mules or horses, drought horses, or riding horses, or war horses.
Mm-hmm.
So now a pet is in its own category because that's something that the DM really does just kind of handle in role playing circumstances, right? You come across an animal, maybe there's some off the cuff mechanics for training it, or you know, something. It might just be part of the narrative, or might just be a cool little way for you to give a player a reward that is something that's maybe a little less typical. I suspect that if you've noticed that I don't mind, that I'm pretty, as to use your words, generous, it's because I like rewards that aren't typical. I like rewards that aren't monetary or necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it just gets tiresome giving the players gold and magic items. So I like things that are cool. Maybe you get a cool title, maybe you get favors, privileges, and pets are probably in that category. And before there was a strong mechanic for familiars and beast companions, I like to award players those things too. It's probably a little more has a little more action economy now that it is baked into the rules. So that cuts both ways. But in my estimation, there's kind of a few broad buckets, right? So, like, it's probably either some sort of utility tool, a combat ally, or it's just a narrative device. And
Mm-hmm.
pets are almost always a pure narrative device, and maybe you give them a little bit of combat prowess or a little bit of utility. But for the most part, they're just there for kind of flavor, maybe a little comic relief. Whereas a beast companion is obviously meant to be a combat ally, a familiar to a lesser degree, has some combat capabilities, but is mostly a utility tool. Same thing with a mount, is mostly utility. It's for getting from point A to point B faster. But if you have a war horse or a summoned steed, it might have some combat prowess too. And from my experience, mounts don't usually have much narrative purpose. Although I wish they would, because you know, in a lot of stories and stuff, you know, characters kind of like bond with their horses or whatever. They have names, they have like whatever. I wish there were a little more of that, but it's not something I typically force on the
Mm-hmm.
players.
Yeah, I was thinking the same as you pretty much earlier when I was putting together my notes. And I'm going, like, my first section here is what I got from Patrick the last
Mm,
time that he played a wizard with his familiar.
mm,
Because I was thinking of all the reasons that you would use a companion, in,
yeah.
and why. And I thought, oh yeah, like you said, expand your capabilities really as a character.
Yeah.
Um, like scout ahead through small spaces or dangerous areas. Can help carry equipment or supplies. Uh, Again, from Patrick beforehand, I don't think I've ever really done this. I've always used them in battle or as like a reconnaissance tool, but Patrick like used them quite a bit for these things, and I thought they were really cool. Actually, I'm not digging on them at all. I think these are pretty cool. But provide sensory abilities, keen smell, dark vision, flight, etc. Um, and then like he would do things, hold on, I gotta make sure here, yeah, the risk management stuff that he would do, like investigate dangerous situations before committing, where he would have his familiar go through tunnels or underneath doors, and this is another thing that I thought, because I was like, man, you just kind of throw him into anything. Because I was on that side of, oh, this is my familiar, this is my buddy, I got to protect him. But even if they fall to 0 hit points, you can just summon them again.
Yeah,
Got it. And
it's
Patrick
just
knew
a
that.
spell slot. Yeah.
Like trigger traps, you can use them to trigger traps, maintain watches during rest, and serve as early warning systems, because if they do get killed, quote unquote, they can always be summoned back. Now, your beast companion or pets, this is completely different. That would be for a familiar. This here, I think, depending on whatever the rule system it gives you, I don't think that you would be doing a lot of the risk management with like a pet or a beast companion, just because losing them could be such a detriment. Uh,
Yeah, but if I'm not mistaken, the Beast Companion's abilities kind of scale with your level. They even
yeah,
ramped it up in the 2024 edition so
yeah,
that
that's
it
a cool thing about the beast companions. Like the familiars don't increase at all, but companions do.
yeah, but it's I mean Patrick I suspect it's because Patrick looks at his familiar as somebody who flies drones. He looks at it kind of like a drone, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like it's got these sometimes it has dark vision or it might have special senses, it might have the ability to fly or burrow. So you kind of use it as like this drone scout.
Yeah.
And that's a very cool use. And it does have some limited combat uses, right? Like sometimes people forget that you can use your I never really remember how it works, but your familiar rolls its own initiative and it can only take certain actions. So you can use it to help allies, and you can also use it to deliver a spell that has the range of touch from the familiar. So you can stay safe, but your familiar doesn't. And typically, because they only have a few hit points, yeah, if they get hit, they're kind of boned. But you're really just talking about it costs you a spell slot. It's not being killed, it's just being kind of banished from whatever dimension it's
Yeah.
in. Although I don't know how this works with things that aren't, I guess because they're magically summoned from another plane, right? Because they're all like a pseudo dragon, although it's technically it's a fey creature, and the
Yeah.
imp is a
Imp is a devil.
demon, devil,
Quasit
Quasit's
is
a
the demon.
demon, and a sprite is also a fey. So they're all from some other plane, so they're just getting kind of banished back, and you're just kind of using a spell slot to bring them back. So I think the 2024 rules add some other options, but they're all pretty operationally the same. And I also think because I want to say one of the warlock builds gets a familiar as well,
Yeah.
doesn't don't
Yeah.
they?
Pact of the Chain.
Pack of the Chain, right? So
That's how you get the imp Quasit or pseudo dragon, all that.
right, unless they're like a reward from
Yeah.
your GM, which
Hmm.
I've done that a few times too, just to kind of up the stakes of kind of the use of a familiar, which gives, especially for a warlock, it kind of gives a pretty much purely combat class a little more utility, which I like. I don't like characters that are just like purely combat focused. They tend to be kind of boring. But yeah, you're right as far as pets go, and typically for mounts, you try to keep them out of harm's way. They might maybe interact in battle in some way, and some of those little role playing things can be fun, especially because depending on the pet, it's not likely to be a huge threat to enemies. So, if you have a little weasel pet or whatever, it's not unreasonable to say that you could, I don't know, use a bonus action or whatever to whistle at him, and maybe he would pick up your dagger that you dropped and bring it over to you on the battlefield or something. Stuff like that is really
Yeah.
neat.
Let's see. Next, I got for our storytelling benefits that I wanted to know if you, because this is just something that I thought I've never used this before, but trying to help characters kind of like develop, or helping players develop their characters a little bit more. A companion can help with that. So if you gave them one, like if you think of old stories where like a noble knight, with his loyal dog, suggests a little bit different values than like a necromancer with a raven does.
Yeah.
Or how a character treats their companion can communicate personality better than, you know, sometimes than their, like me right now, their limited vocabulary. But do you think that is a good tool to use maybe in the future.
Yeah, well, especially because uh, I do think it's really good because it's a sounding board because especially animals often don't speak back, or if they do, they might even speak back in a language that the PC doesn't understand. But often they're, unless they're a pet, they might be smarter than the average animal, in which case they might understand things that a normal animal would not, but not have the capacity to process it the way a person would. So, this is often a device in lots of stories that are adventure stories, but the character is by themselves, right? So there's really not much of an opportunity for the character to have a lot of dialogue, but
Hmm.
they kind of have a dialogue with themselves, and it gives you a good reason for them to kind of think out loud because they might be talking to their horse or talking to their dog or, like, and it's a reflection of the character's inner monologue. Like maybe they're considering going in and the dog is like looking up at the character and he's looking at him. He's like, I know what you're thinking. It's scary in there, right? Like, but we have to go. It's like, it's the only way that we gotta go. And then the dog's like, and he's like, yeah, I see your point, but like, this is really the character dialoguing with themselves, but it seems more organic because especially under duress and especially under circumstances that might be dangerous when we're alone, we probably would have a tendency to be that way instead of just being like totally mute and like being like, this is an animal. He doesn't understand me. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
anything to it. Right. And so,
Yeah. I put that down for like the emotional investment that can go along with character development.
yeah.
You can create some more uh, emotional stakes really if you keep this companion around for a while. You might be able to up the stakes a little bit.
Yeah, and it also creates other dynamics with other players because it's possible that your beast companion, your mount, or whatever, has a particular type of relationship with other characters that might be the same reflections of your own sensibilities about them, or they might be different. And frankly, if they're different, it's probably a little more interesting. It gives the beast companion or the pet, for lack of a better word, more personality. It's like this is a thing with people all the time where they'll be like, that just, my dog, he senses something about that guy. He doesn't like him, and dogs
Hmm.
can sense that sort of thing. It's like, no, the dog can sense that you don't like that guy and you're its master. So it doesn't like it because you are in some way, whether you realize it or not, behaving like this person is a threat to you.
Hmm.
And so they get protective and they have a tendency to react in the same way, or not the same way, but in a more pronounced way that you probably might not even be aware of. But it might be even more interesting where it's like maybe you're buddies with somebody and your beast companion like is dismissive of them, or your best friend in the party, your horse won't let him mount it or whatever. Like
Hmm.
there's a whole spectrum of things that could create interesting dynamics and be springboards to role playing encounters with other characters within the party. And I think that's where it kind of like lives and dies, where it like they begin to feel like a member of the party based on how they interact in travel montages or at camp or maybe even like in the tavern or whatever. And so this kind of adds texture, and what it does is it adds gravity to the presence of this particular, uh, NPC animal or what beast or whatever it is, to the point where the characters are likely to have some semblance of affection towards something that's not really a huge utility to them in the same way another PC would be. But if you've ever watched a movie and like a dog gets shot and killed protecting its master, it's hard not to just be like, but he was a good boy, like
But he
he was
was a good
like,
boy.
right, he was just, he was just doing, it's like you get the feels, right? People
Yeah.
are people are assholes, and so something bad happens to him, you're like, yeah, he probably did something at some point to deserve it. But a dog is just like it's a dog, it's
Yeah.
like the best. Or the little bird gets crushed or something, and you're just like sad about it. So, anytime you can inject something into your game that makes your PCs feel the drama and feel the stakes of something in even a kind of hokey emotional way, then I generally am in favor of that. It's much better than, just kind of some object that's a benefit to them or whatever.
Mm. Uh, my next section here is GM benefits and downsides.
Uh-oh.
Yep. So I was trying to think of why it would be a good idea to introduce a companion of some sort, kind of like how David has done for me in the past and some of the other people that we've played with. For game masters, companions can help deliver clues a little bit more naturally, introduce plot hooks, provide warnings or foreshadowings, like David was just saying.
Mm-hmm.
How, maybe a pet wolf or pet dog does growl at somebody that you thought was very friendly, and it gives off maybe it can either create new tension or it gives us a plot hook.
Yeah.
It can also, I put this down, this is a little bit wild out there, but if you can make it work, it's great. Give players a non-human perspective on events,
Mm-hmm.
which actually, now that I talk about it, works out quite well because of how Beto's Quasit for his warlock, how you kind of played their banter back and forth, and even
Yeah.
how the Quasit would pretty much say, I don't know why you hang around with these dick bags. You got a job to do.
Yeah. I liked that was one of the things that I thought was I was like, look, I get that it's a big benefit to give a Warlock PC at a pretty low level. I think he was like third or fourth. The Quasit is kind of a upgraded. Um, he's an upgraded minion, right? Let's just
Hmm.
call them minions. That's kind of what they are, right? So familiar, mount, pet, whatever. They're some form of a minion, and so giving that upgrade at a lower level is a pretty big boon. But I was like, look, it's not a huge boon. I do think generally the the mechanics for familiars, mounts, and beast companions are pretty well balanced within the context of D&D. So it's really hard to like abuse those mechanics in a way that like causes the GM to go like, okay, like this is kind of broken. Um, it's difficult. Maybe if you had one character in the party whose whole design was like to be a scout, to be stealthy, to move up ahead, to eavesdrop, and like that was their whole role in the party. And now one of the players has basically a free pass to do that because it's like, oh, this guy can turn invisible and he flies, and like he can scout ahead, and I can see through his senses. It's like, well, that kind of nullifies that entire character's role in the party. But generally speaking, that's pretty much a non-issue. It's pretty well balanced. Um, but there's some narrative fertile ground there, and in the particular case of Beto's Quasit, I thought it was worth giving him this little boon, like kind of
Hmm.
upfront, because it was a reward from his patron. His patron's the Orcus, the demon lord or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I gave him this Quasit, and this is like like an emissary, right? He's a what do you call that? What's the word? What is the Silver Surfer to Galactus?
Yeah. His Herald.
Yeah. And so he's kind of like this bridge between the sensibilities of the patron as a oversight, right? He's
Mm.
watching you and he's like reporting back and he's like keeping everything on brand, like what you're supposed to be doing and all this. And he's like super evil, right? And Beto's character is not super evil, and he's like trying to get along with the party, and the Quasic is like telling him constantly, like, these are your goals, and this is what you're doing. And it was like, I just thought that role playing opportunity was worth the trade off of a bigger boon than he might have otherwise got at that level, especially because it's not exactly like it breaks it.
Hmm.
Um, and there actually was that one. Were you playing with us when that? I think it might have been before you joined the party, or it might have been our first Curse of Strahd campaign. No, it wasn't because it was Beto had the Quasit. So, um, but there was like they were like rallying everybody in Valakey, and they were trying to dispose the Burgomaster, right? And it was like this. It was like 7 or 8 or 9 sessions of like role playing,
Hmm. Oh, yeah, yeah.
and they were coordinating. And Beto had this clever idea. He was like, "Oh, you know what I'll do is like in order to show that the Burgomaster has like no control over the town, and to turn the townsfolk against him, I'll have the Quasit run amok, and then we'll come in and I'll command the Quasit to stop, and it'll look like we saved the day, and everybody will be on our side, right?" Um, and so he does this, But then, like, whatever, I was like, okay, you got to make a check, right? Like, the Quasit isn't just like under your control completely.
Yeah.
Like, it's an evil creature. And he fumbled this check. And so it's like he's like, oh yeah, go over here and scare these people. He's using his little scare feature, he's like, and he's like scaring all the townsfolk. But then because he's evil, he kind of gets into the groove and then he just starts like attacking people and like shredding their faces up and shit. And he's like, whoa, like not that part. And then he's just like running amok and he's like ends up killing all these like innocent townsfolk. And then I think the burgomaster like died of a heart attack or something like that. And so it was like they were like, I mean, all's well that ends well, I guess. The burgomaster is deposed, but there was all these people that were dead and shit. And they were like, what the fuck was that? They were like, don't tell anyone that's our Quasit, right? Like we saved the
Yeah.
day, but like shit. And so uh, it was a really kind of amusing moment that was dark. It was in line with the Curse of Strahd. It was right. It was like kind of
Mm.
dark, but had a little bit of levity in it. It was really fun stuff. And so I don't mind the uptick in bonuses there as far as that goes.
The downsides, of course, I'm sure there's already some here that people have thought of. Like, of course, they significantly slow down combat as they are another combatant.
I was gonna mention that. Yeah.
And of course, they have their own turn. So it, of course, is going to, and if the person playing it is very new to having Beast Companion, familiar, whatever it may be, maybe they're not really used to having another stat block around with
It's
them, and it takes some time.
Oh, you were definitely around for this portion. Rangers that run a beast companion never forget that they have a beast companion.
Uh huh.
And pets often don't have a stat block. That was one thing I kind of wanted to ask you about, like when is it appropriate to give a pet like a stat block?
Mm.
But we'll get there in a minute. But this was a thing with Beto because he wasn't used to having a familiar. It was just kind of around. It was like every time in combat, it would be like his turn would roll around and he would go like, my turn is over, and I would be like, okay, and now your familiar does nothing because you didn't command it to do
Hmm.
anything. And every time he'd be like, fuck, and it was seriously like 9 times in a row or something like that. I just because the familiar went right after him, and I just had to
Yep.
say, your familiar does nothing because you didn't command it to do anything. And he's just like every
Hmm.
time he's like, fuck. It's like, yeah, you're just missing an opportunity there. You're just missing bonus fries. But to me, the familiar's turn, because its options are so limited, really shouldn't be bogging down play. And if they are, then you need to have a talk with the player running the familiar to go like, look, you need to consider not just what you're doing on your turn, but what your familiar is doing. It
Hmm.
can deliver a touch spell, it can move, it can
It can
perform
aid
an
another
action,
player.
it can aid another player, it can dodge. I think it can disengage, and
Hmm.
that's it. So it's like you need to be deciding what it's doing on its turn every time. If it's bogging down, like that should be a relatively quick turn. Um, and so, other familiars might have other actions available to it. But generally speaking, it should be pretty simple and streamlined. Um, and if you're making use of it synergistically, then you should really have an idea like, okay, I'm going to cast the spell using the touch feature of the familiar, and then in which case you just kind of handle that. But it should be pretty quick and easy. But you're right, it is another turn in combat that
Hmm.
could conceivably bog stuff down. I've not had that problem. Have you had that problem?
No, not really. But normally, everybody that I've had play in my games that have a familiar or a pet, they are very, very aware that it's there and they know everything about it.
Yeah.
So they make it very quickly. They actually do, because I don't do initiatives for familiars or pets. I just have them
Hmm.
always act right after the player or the player character. So
Yeah.
they always, sometimes they even make it work so that they work in tandem together. And I really like that.
Yeah. How do you treat pets in kind of turn-based combat? Do you just kind of go like treat them like mounts where they're just like, okay, they're just not available, and they probably at the first available opportunity like get out of the fight, and if they just go like on the player's turn and they take their opportunity to get out of the fight as quickly as possible, or do you kind of leave them around? Because I think the longer you leave around, especially a mount, um, the the likelihood that something bad might happen to it is kind
Mhm.
of increased every round.
Yeah,
Maybe if you have a
mounts.
pet. frog or something, that's not an issue.
Yeah.
Um, but
Mounts
other.
definitely, because everybody that I've ever played with, when we're playing medieval fantasy style, everybody just has like a riding horse the majority of
Hmm.
the time. So, like these things are not used to being around this sort of thing. So yes, they run the fuck away as soon as they're scared. If
Yeah,
they have maybe a more heavily built, like a oh shit, what's the other the draft horse? If you use a
yeah,
draft horse, or not even gonna go to war horse because that's their whole thing is that they're brave and they're ready to go into battle. But like a
right.
draft horse, a little bit more solid, a little bit bigger, a little bit more imposing, might stamp around for a few rounds before running off.
Yeah,
But I don't, I because I don't want to sacrifice their mounts and wait for them to, oh, I smack it on the ass so it gets out of here.
yeah.
Uh, I usually say make sure to let them know that after the first round or so, be like, oh yeah, your mounts got scared, ran off. But
I would think that I would think that a drought horse would be more likely to run, considering it's only doing. It's not even
pulling heavy
traveling out.
shit.
It's not even doing like it's not even traveling out in the wilderness where it might encounter beasts or
Hmm.
used to being run hard or whatever. It's doing like domestic labor, so it's very, very isolated from anything that might be a threat to it. But it is bigger and like more imposing
Yeah.
than a riding horse. But yeah, so I don't know. I have trouble with that too. It's like, but as a general rule, I find like especially like a war horse, it goes into battle, but it's not super combat capable.
No.
But for the most part, unless enemies get a pretty big advantage from like killing your horse, they're likely to, horses are valuable. And so they're likely to not want to kill the horse because one, you're a bigger threat than the horse. And two, like if they kill you, they can just take it, right? Like you're not going to throw acid on somebody's armor if they have really cool armor just to damage them, right? You'd be like, well, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool armor. I'm going to take it when I kill them. Um, so that's kind of like a natural mechanism. But for something like like I said, a pet weasel or something that gets caught in a fucking AOE spell, it's like, well, what do you do with that?
Yep. That's why I always let at least a round go by first, just in case
Hmm.
something happens.
Hmm.
Maybe it won't be enough to, if it is like you said, an AOE spell or something. Maybe it might won't be enough to kill the mounts, but it
Hmm.
will at least light a fire underneath the players, being like, "Oh shit, yeah, they're in danger."
Yeah.
What do you think of this one? I put down just as with a question mark at the end. Um, do you think it could happen, or if it does happen, what should you do if the pets or minions overshadow other players?
Again, I think mechanically that's not very likely unless you just have really inept players. The general thing is that you as the GM should be in charge of how prominent the even if the beast companion is technically controlled and the familiar is technically controlled by the player, that doesn't mean that its personality is up to the player, for lack of a better word. Its temperament, if that's what you want to call it.
I agree
So
with you on that. That's
from a
how I
role
would always
playing
do it.
standpoint, yeah, you can just tamp that down if it's getting to be too much. And if their mechanical benefits are outweighing, if a player's features like a sub features for a familiar or a beast companion are overshadowing another player's total suite of abilities, it's probably because those players in the second category aren't leveraging their abilities very well. So
Mm.
that's really on the player, not on the GM.
What else do I have here? I think the last two things I have here for potential downsides. Oh yeah, other than they become disposable tools rather than characters,
Yeah.
which is just more my own feelings. I don't mind. I could see a twisted wizard using his familiar to be just that. Oh, here, this actually goes well with what you were asking me before about stat blocks for familiars and pets and whatnot. Because I was thinking when I was writing this, I was just like, the GM and the players disagree about how vulnerable they should be. Because I've had this conversation with GMs in the past
Yeah.
about, well, I don't think it would be this strong when if you said you didn't had a if you had a minion with you, there's no stat blocks for him really. But I was just and it's thinking like, well, we need something, something there to let us know how tough they are, and if they do have any other abilities, just write it out for us, please.
Yeah.
But I've played in plenty of games where they had nothing, and they were just like, yeah, just play it out.
Yeah, I mean, for animals, like for pets, for instance, um, I don't typically think that a stat block is necessary. They're
No, and I think that way for a lot of mounts as well, unless you have something like a ram, again, maybe a war horse.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Here's a general rule of thumb: is I assume a pet, like, okay, maybe you might want to determine what its armor class is to see if it
Mhm.
gets hit. And if it gets hit, it's probably dead, right?
Right.
Like most animals aren't a threat unless they're beast companion animals, in which case they are a threat and they have combat stats.
Hmm.
Mounts, I can see like, okay, you want to have an idea of like how much damage they can take because they're probably not a one shot, one kill at mid and low levels. Yeah, maybe between somewhere between 10 and 25 hit points. And so they can probably get hit maybe once, maybe twice, but what's the likelihood that that's going to happen? The naturally correcting thing that I think of is how much benefit is the mount giving and how
Hmm.
big of a threat is it is probably going to govern how much attention it draws. So in a big battlefield where someone's on a war horse and they're trouncing from one end of the battlefield and they're a big striker, they have a paladin with like all sorts of smites and they're just riding up and down, like killing people left and right. Someone's going to go like that horse is allowing him a level of mobility and plate armor and he's smoking the shit out of all of our guys. I want to kill the horse. So the last thing you would want is for a pet or a mount or a familiar or a beast companion or anything to seem like they have plot armor. Like they can just mill around the battlefield and no one's gonna think about
Hmm.
hurting them. But the naturally correcting sensibility to that is, well, in a fight, you're gonna go after the threats. You're not gonna waste a turn attacking a fucking dog who isn't even attacking you,
Yeah.
right? Just to hurt the PCs. They wouldn't think like that, and the dog is not likely. And maybe if the dog attacks them, then in which case you would probably have some reason to think that the dog is needs a stat block, right?
Hmm.
So there's a whole variety of differences because you can have a pet butterfly or toad or snake. That's not the same thing as, like you said, a pet goat or a dog or something that is maybe got some combat capabilities and probably wouldn't have enough sense to go like, I better get out of here. It's like, well, this thing is attacking my master and it's likely just gonna attack,
Hmm.
and likely get killed. So the that seems like something that should be handled from a role playing aspect from the player, as the player commands the dog or commands the whatever to go somewhere else or ensures that it's not in the line of fire in a fight. So those things kind of get handled in an auxiliary way. I just try to go like, okay, I don't want to give the animal or whatever the thing is plot armor, but I also don't want to make it be like I'm just going to kill it because it's punitive against the players when that would really make no sense. That an orc would go like, that dog is a greater threat than the guy standing next to it with a sword and shield. Like, no, we would not do that. So you got to follow kind of basic logic rules there sometimes, and it's kind of a sticky balance at times, but it's mostly players should mostly have a pretty good idea of whether something is kind of hard combat ready, soft combat ready, get it out of harm's way kind of ready. And I think if you calibrate the expectations properly based on where it sits mechanically, they probably ought to have that slider adjusted accordingly.
Do you have any benefits that you can think of for having companions?
Like, you mean like pets or just companions in general?
Companions in general, non com. Well, I guess I shouldn't say non-combatant, but just yeah, any companions in general, not
Well,
NPCs.
yeah, most of which we've already discussed, is it kind of provides a sounding board and some cool role playing opportunities. If they give them little perks, um, little exploration perks, that's typically cool. I like little narrative perks, like I gave the example of, like, your whatever your little pet pulling your weapon over to you. I think those things are cool, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that they help the player feel a sense of affection toward a pet. Or like, maybe even if they do have some, combat capabilities, it's not necessarily a big mechanical benefit so much as it's like a little plot benefit, like when the ferret crawls out of the little boy's shirt at the end of Kindergarten Cop and like bites that dude in the neck. You're like, okay, that's cool, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's like a thing a pet would do, right?
Yeah.
Not enough to hurt him, but like maybe it distracts him long enough to get a benefit or something like that. I like those things for narrative purposes, and then kind of as a most subsets of these things, they're going to provide some sort of utility, either scouting or just increased travel pace in the case of mounts, or even a pet. That wouldn't maybe if a pet bird or something can see things from overhead and it's not a familiar per se, but it scouts out and there's kind of like a role playing opportunity to kind of try to see if the bird saw anything, and it's kind of screeches once for danger, twice for all clear or whatever. This just kind of forces your players to think of more creative ways to solve problems, and anything that does that, I think, is a generally a benefit and kind of creates the kind of dynamic at a table that I typically like.
I'd have to agree with you. Um, well, actually, no, that's it. That's all I have. You got anything else to add on there, Dave?
I don't.
All right. Well, then I think we're going to bring this one to a close. What about all of you out there? Do you like using pets, companions, familiars, minions? Any of those things? Let us know. Or send in your own little questions that we can talk about, discuss at insidethegmstudio@gmail.com. Send it in, or just let us know how we're doing. We always like to know that. But please give us some sort of topics to talk about. We like to talk about shit, and we want to talk about the shit that you want to hear. Or if you ever want, usually, not today, we are live over on twitch.tv/Inside the GM Studio every Sunday, 9 p.m. Eastern. But for this week, for Inside the GM Studio, I've been your host, man.
And if you have any homebrew companions that you have, send them in. I'm
Love
David.
that. A good night.